I don't have to solve it, do I? The answer's probably in one of those books. Have a dig about while I greet our guests. You're our team. Yeah, so Myst is certainly a game. One of the games of all time, some would say. A beloved beauty that has understandably seen many iterations of its design, from the original to a fully fledged remake in 2021. And the stark visual difference between them is absolutely staggering. But I honestly believe that this original PNG puzzle iteration that could run on a modern toaster is vastly superior to anything that came after it. Because slowly, Myst has kind of gotten worse with age. What? Yeah, let me explain. First of all, it's important to understand the context in which the original Myst was released. Cast your mind back to 1993. Free Willy was on the big screen. I was just a wee fetus, and PC gaming looked like this. It's the Wild West of early 3D through the ever-popular Doom, or explorable, intricate, interactive environments in games like Dave the Tentacle, each trying to use the tools they have available to them to render these environments in their own unique styles that could run on a variety of potatoes, be that russet or Intel. So imagine gamers' surprise when this showed up on store shelves, a close to photorealistic, perplexing world that is freely explorable. Well, yeah, I know what it looks like today, but this is technically photorealistic because they're photos. It's PNGs. This game was painstakingly modeled in Stratavision 3D and then baked with detailed textures to a degree that had never been seen before, and then compressed into single 8-bit images. Then, by using Apple's HyperCard software, the developers could stack these singular images atop one another, and via clicking cleverly placed invisible buttons, they could transition between them instantaneously to allow players to move around in these detailed environments without their CPUs having a digital aneurysm. All of this, for the time, was a super innovative solution, but it gets tricky when the player wants to actually interact with the world's objects. So to stop it feeling like a mildly interactive slideshow, they had to get creative with the interaction implementation to maintain that performance so they didn't blow up someone's house because they tried to click on a painting. For example, on a CD-ROM, all of the data of its rendered images, FMV-style animations, or sounds are all stored in different locations, and when you click on something in-game, the disk itself needs to spin up and then travel to those locations in a kind of spiral pattern as it reads the data. So you want to minimize the amount of data it needs to read at any one time and store related data in close proximity to one another. And this is the exact reason Myst is split into these distinct chunks, or ages as they call them. Another part of that optimization was only animating specific fields of the screen isolated to the player's interaction range, drastically reducing the data needed to be loaded from the CD at any one time. For a creative example of how they dealt with this, instead of re-rendering the entire screen per frame if the player wants to, say, pick something up, you signify it with a custom mouse cursor, or only load a small section of the screen to be re-rendered based on player input. While interacting with this safe's lever, for example, you can see its interaction range being loaded via this tiny outline. The rest of the screen's real estate is completely static, and this drastically reduces load. The same can be seen with doors. Because they only have two functions, there can simply be two static images of them being opened or closed, and then they use a form of wipe transition between these two images to manufacture this door animation. But at the same time, to give the illusion of shadow when this door is open, the range of this image cutout is extended to include this wall, cleverly using the geometry of the tower itself as a natural cutoff point for that image. Countless amounts of these simple tricks were used all over Myst in its many ages to give the illusion of these more complex animations that could run somewhat smoothly on most available hardware, and all of these details added so much depth to its world. But because of how they could still negatively affect performance, the developers had to be sporadic with them and get more creative with the tools they did have access to, namely sound. Because it is substantially faster to have a CD-ROM retrieve a sound effect and make its way back to the same static image instead of attempting to load new visual data for a unique animation. So the developers favor sound effects as signifiers over animations for this reason, to convey many different things in the world, like the rapping of waves on Myst shores, the rumbling of the generator room, or the churning of the clock tower, adding substance to the world with no animations needed. But this also affects its puzzle designs. Have you ever noticed that when you complete a puzzle condition, you rarely actively see the result of your actions? You either hear it or are provided a piece of information guiding you to the next point of progression instead. Because the actual change is reflected on the other side of the island, it was just signified via a sound cue. And doing this means all they need to change is the card that will be loaded when the player returns to that area. Almost all of Myst's major puzzle interactions are like this for production reasons, designed to ping-pong the player around its world rather than be isolated in one interaction screen. Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of what you would expect from being built around singular rendered images. My favourite example of this comes in the opening of the game with this note. It informs the player of a location of importance beside the dock that players may have missed, and to unlock the message located inside its device, it asks them to input the total number of maker switches on the island. The player may not know what they are or even how to input the number, so they try to leave, but as they turn, the developers employ a reward reversal reveal to give them further information, teaching them how to use the machine itself and what maker switches look like in the process of that. This is the beauty of using fixed camera angles, or singular rendered images in this case. You can almost guarantee what the player will see when entering or exiting or simply traversing an environment. Then, by using manufactured chiaroscuro or the sharp contrast between light and darkness, you can draw player attention in specific directions, not allowing their minds to wander to the relevance of every single object in the room. Coming back to this opening note, once the player knows what maker switches are, it then guides them to explore the island with the intention of counting each switch they encounter and subsequently introducing them to all key puzzle locations on the island itself. This way, the developers can guarantee the player has explored the island enough before allowing them to unlock the hidden message and the knowledge of the tower rotation's importance, all facilitated by a singular note. This flip-flopping of the player clearly has positives, but a negative can be that because these puzzle changes happen over some pretty vast distances, there can be some disconnect between the puzzle you've just completed and the actual progress it's facilitating. So to combat this, the developers got weird. And Myst being a bit of a freak is one of its greatest assets when it comes to puzzle guidance. The visual and literal language used in Myst is extremely strange, using nondescript symbols, names, and puzzle iconography all being spread out across the game's multiple distinct and separate ages. In other games, this kind of design could become overwhelming and confusing quickly, but here its oddness is a blessing. And my favourite example of this would be this chimney. Intentionally or not, when you first crawl inside this chimney like a Dickensian orphan with black lung, your first and only thought is probably going to be, what? When then you click this button and reveal a holographic checkerboard of what seems like infinite combinations for it. What the fuck is happening? I'm in the fireplace. This design language here is so weird and so distinctly connected to this specific puzzle that finding any information relating to it will immediately connect itself back to this location. And the beauty of Myst is that also works in reverse too. Because the majority of its puzzles to access its different ages are non-linear and can be done out of order, and because of this, it's incredibly easy to stumble upon information that you don't understand the relevance of just yet. But because the design language here is so batshit insane, it's hard to brute force them or even understand how they work without the needed information. And all of this comes together to create scenarios where you have a hodgepodge of different crazy threads to follow, which makes stumbling upon a book with 300 different square combinations a moment of euphoria. Yeah, don't mind me, mate. I'll just be in the chimney doing puzzle crack. All of this for 1993 as what the developers deemed as an experiment. Myst is honestly fantastic, and because of its focus on mouse-only controls and the slow pacing, it made it endlessly accessible, not just from a disability standpoint, but also from a pleb one. What I mean by that is non-gamers could enjoy this, where they might be overwhelmed by Doom per se, which is why Myst outsold Doom on PC by nearly double by the turn of the millennium. I just love seeing how creative these developers had to get. It makes me realize how spoiled we are by the tools we have access to nowadays, but Cyan themselves are not immune to this spoiledness either. That'll make sense in a minute. So understandably, because of its popularity, Myst has received sequels and most notably in our case, remasters and remakes over the 32 years since its initial release, which makes sense. Times they do be a-changing. Graphical and hardware advancements, even over the span of 5 years in the remaining 90s, made Myst look antiquated in comparison to its competition, so the desire to bring it up to modern standards without those previous limitations is a just one. But looking back, those limitations may have been the thing that made it so special in the first place. Now, out of all of these remakes, Real Myst Masterpiece Edition is commonly considered the worst one, but there are some positive additions here. Because of the advancements in technology, the game no longer needs to reset itself on transitions. For example, the aforementioned chimney puzzle. In the OG, you could input the code and get a single placement wrong on this grid of 48 squares, and the entire thing would need to reset itself. But now, they can hold all that information in memory, so you just need to replace the single block that was wrong. This is a great thing. It also looks a lot nicer, as you can see, and they left most of the puzzle solutions alone. All quiet on Myst's western front so far, until the lights go down. As we mentioned before, all lighting was baked into the rendered images themselves in the original game, using only 256 colors on screen at once, and games in 2014 when Real Myst Masterpiece Edition was released, developers had the ability to do much more than that in real time. Because of this, the developers implemented a day-night cycle into Real Myst, which seems inconsequential, but this has drastic effects on how certain items, rewards, and even entire puzzles are framed. Because it's a cycle, the developers can't account for how the puzzles will be framed with light itself. Gone are the days of rays of light that subtly guide players to hidden pages. If it's night, which is half of the fucking time by the way, you ain't seeing shit. Oh, but don't worry mate, in the pause menu they've provided the player with a torch, but scouring the environment with it while trying to figure out what any of this cryptic shit actually is a nightmare. And you know how I know that? This is the first version of the game I played for some ungodly reason. Also, emotionally, this added darkness kind of stinks as well. Like in the original, you stumble into Akinar's hidden torture room. What is inside that box? A corpse? A chimp demon? Just a severed face? Mystery. Horror, intrigue, banging, and all large. But the same place in Real Myst, just flick on the light. Oh, it's a mask. All right, moving on. Also, in service of modernization, inside the classic Myst movement mode, they've added transitions between each screen, which just adds a bunch of wait time and tedium for simply traveling around. But in a baffling turn of events, they've removed a feature that immediately skips to key locations if you'd previously visited them, called zip mode, which was in the original game but has been removed here? Well, maybe they wanted people to use the free movement mode. Well, see, that's a good point and brings me to their 2021 remake of Myst. Real Myst was a bit of a blunder to be sure, but with the ability to use Unreal Engine, Cyan made Myst once again for the modern era. Dynamic but static lighting, higher poly counts, crisper textures, woof. This is the best Myst has ever looked, no doubt about it, but they completely removed the classic movement style in favor of free roam 3D first person movement, which is obviously the hip thing to do. You know, all the kids are doing it, but actions have consequences. When the player themselves has the responsibility to frame each environment for themselves, it becomes harder to subtly signify what part of the space is important, and this is slightly mitigated by them retaining the mouse signifier to easily deduce interactables, but those spaces to check have exponentially grown and now include sections in between the original static frames. The worst example of this is the very opening of the game again. We spoke at length about the beauty and importance of this singular letter. In the original, when you move up these stairs, it is clearly signified on the ground, and the forced framing makes it incredibly likely for the player to stumble upon it. But in the remake, they for some reason move the note and place it upon a boulder? So when the player is moving up these stairs, you better hope that they're not looking at the trees or the myriad of new buildings that they've never seen before, and hope they're scouring the land for an A4 sheet of liquid plot, which I can't see them doing unless they've played the game before. But saying that, when I played the remake, I was looking for the page and I still couldn't find it. Looking at all of this, I don't understand what this rock accomplishes. If anything, the perfect place for the page to be moved in free-look mode is right here. You already carved out the perfect place for it, and this framing problem with the free look just grows exponentially as the player progresses. So because of this, they do make some positive additions to compensate, such as adding a button to this dockyard door so the player understands it's interactable, or adding buttons here, or on these crystals, but actions, as previously stated, have consequences. Because adding buttons conveys meaning of importance. These crystals, for example, have nothing to do with the area's puzzle at hand, but comboed with the player's responsibility to frame these scenes, a neatly lined up array of light-up crystals in one of the area's 4 rooms screams relevance, but in reality, they're fluff, but the player doesn't know that. Call this obfuscation or whatever, but the buttons just add to this issue. But to baffle you a little bit more, why add a bunch of sometimes needless buttons but remove useful signifiers from the original game? The ship indicator on this hidden path puzzle, gone. Date, month, year and time on this console, gone. And the ultimate sin, they removed the cute little match lighting animation and replaced it with a button. I will never forgive you, Cyan. Well, actually, no, I will. There's a fucking tiny gripe. But all of these additions reminds me of this quote from the making of Myst, which is a fantastic watch, by the way.
I started off kind of seeing it from an artist's perspective. I would look for the most interesting scene that I could come up with. But the problem I ran into was that every time I made it look interesting, it didn't work for the interface because it was unrealistic. I mean, you don't look at everything as a composition. When you're walking through a room, you're either just walking through a room or you're stopping and staring at everything. And the hardest thing for me was to try to make that transition from trying to make everything look really pretty composed and make it work as far as interface goes.
And I think over the years, for whatever reason, Cyan may have lost sight of what that and limitations can forcibly bring to the table. It actually makes me even more intrigued to dive into Riven and see what they were able to cook up with some of their chains loosened with the ability to tackle new ideas rather than finding new ways to spice up the original one. Because I'm as white as the moon is pale and Myst is spicy enough for me just the way it is in all its single frame PNG glory. But what do you think? Is the original Myst enough to get your puzzle juices flowing, or do you actually prefer the remake? And do you believe that the full 3D movement dampens the teaching and exploration in it at all? Let us know down below, because we'd love to discuss this with you. Alright, time to say goodbye, Ludo. Alright, bye guys.
Just because he's got a bad case of IBS does not mean he's a terrible roommate, all right?
I get the sense that I would get a lot of good feedback from him when I showed him my flapjacks.
Drama queen.